Hi, I'm Jonathan Cristaldi, wineaccess editor-in-chief. For July's wine club tasting, Sir Lucero, master sommelier, has chosen to dive deep into the classics. So the wines in this collection are classic wines from classic regions of the world. And here to share the stories behind those wines are our fabulous members of our wine team.
The wine in my glass right now is the 2009 Contino Rioja Reserva. A really beautiful wine from a fantastic estate that's about 150 acres in the area of La Guardia within Rioja. Now, I really love this particular wine because I think that with Tempranillo, the grape varietal here within Rioja, I usually find wines dominated by red fruits. And I get a really good amount of concentration of black fruits and a little bit of this dried kind of blue fruit characteristic to it. Let me go ahead and taste the wine, give you a quick little tasty note, and we'll talk about why it makes this wine so fantastic. Yes, like I had said, definitely a deeper, riper kind of core concentration, slightly dried fruits, red fruit for sure. There's this kind of cranberry, kind of rhubarb-esque kind of profile to it, a little bit of top red cherry, but then you get into a little bit more of a darker, almost slightly dried kind of plum characteristic to it. All of the classic notes of almost a dry kind of resinous sap and almost this kind of like pine kind of needle kind of characteristic is really there, as well as a little bit of this iodine, this kind of red earth, kind of this dusty red earth kind of profile, which is really quite beautiful. Classic in style, a little bit riper and darker in terms of its core, with its concentration. I think this wine is really hitting stride right now. It's a beautiful example of a classic Rioja from a really classic producer, established in 1973. It's just a beautiful wine. I'm sure you're gonna love it as much as I do.
The champagne in my glass is the Michel Turgy Reserve Selection Grand Cru Blanc de Blanc. So this is located in a Grand Cru village of Auger, and the vineyard site is called Les Menils. So Les Menils sur Auger. So all the fruit in this is Chardonnay. When we say a Blanc de Blanc, that means that there's no Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier. It's 100% Chardonnay. And this vineyard site is renowned for being at the very top of the quality pyramid for Chardonnay-based champagne. Michel Turgy is what's called a récoltant manipulant, or RM for short. And what that means in terms of champagne is that they own all of their vineyard sources. This is the new classic movement in champagne, where for a long time, most growers would sell their fruit to some of the larger champagne houses. But now there's this movement to keep it and actually make their own champagne. So this in particular has over 20 years of reserve wines blended in. So what you get is both this real focus of bright acidity, this sort of Meyer lemon peel, apple, but with also a bit of more richness and roundness to the wine. And I am tasting this out of an all-purpose glass rather than a champagne flute, which is how I like to enjoy my champagne, so I can really take in all of the aromas. So it has that great focus, as I talked about, really mouth-watering acidity, but also this sort of round richness, a little bit of brioche and toastiness as well. I hope you enjoy it.
So here we have a Brunello di Montalcino, one of my favorite appellations in Tuscany. And Brunello, for the typicity of Brunello, I'm looking for essentially three things. One, it comes from a very specific strain of Sangiovese called Sangiovese Grosso, or locally known as Brunello, hence the name Brunello di Montalcino. And two, I'm looking for an extended maceration time, which Brunello has a thicker skin and it imparts a richer flavor and a darker color, but also more tannin, gives it a lot of tannic grip, more so than you find in a typical Chianti. And three, Brunello has one of the longest aging requirements in all of Italy. And what that does is help polymerize the tannins. So they have a grip, but they have a softness and a suppleness to them as well. It makes for a very full-bodied wine, but wine that has characteristics of dried fruit and, like I said, good tannins. So this producer in particular, Caparzo, has been around since 1970. When they opened their doors, they were the 13th producer of Brunello di Montalcino, and they have maintained a very classical, traditional style. So this wine was aged for 3 years, was aged for 12 months in small French oak barriques, and then they switched to a larger barrel, which helped, as I said, polymerize the tannins and give it its characteristic depth. So just tasting the wine, you get the aromas of dried cherry and spice that you expect from a Brunello. And there's that perfect balance of grip and acidity. You've got nice tannins, really refreshing acid. Makes for a fantastic food wine.
So this wine is the 2014 vintage of Tor Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. So the proprietor's name is Tor Kenward. He is one of the people that really put Napa on the map. He has roots that date back here over 4 decades. He spent 30 years at Beringer. So very influential winemaker and also just a really great guy. So this is his own brand. The winemaker, though, is Jeff Ames. So Jeff is a part of the younger generation. He's from Alabama originally, but in just a few short years of being in Napa, he's distinguished himself as being one of the top winemakers. So this wine comes from primarily 3 different vineyard sources within Napa. Pritchard Hill, which is not an official AVA in Napa, but is considered one of the top sources for Cabernet Sauvignon. From Chimarosa Vineyard, which is on Hell Mountain, and from Tokelon Vineyard in Oakville, which is considered the Grand Cru of Napa Valley. So beautiful vineyard sources, and combining the 3 together really adds to the complexity of this wine. There's beautiful aromas of black cassis, cherry, liqueur, a little toasty oak, and some mocha notes on the nose. And on the palate, it's really beautiful. It has full tannins, but they're very silky and velvety on the palate. Full-bodied, rich, has a long finish. It's a very decadent wine. I think you'll enjoy it.
Here we have a beautiful bottle of Chateauneuf-du-Pape from Donjon, which is a wonderful, small family-owned producer in the appellation of Chateauneuf-du-Pape. Now, Chateauneuf-du-Pape is known for the ripeness of its grapes. It's known for using a blend of different varieties, particularly Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre, and several others to impart complexity into the wine. And it's also known for a very characteristic wind that locally they call les mistral. The winds blow at 20, 30 miles per hour on a typical day through the vineyards. And they have a curious effect of devigorating the vines and actually causing the vines to lose moisture through a process called transpiration, which concentrates the fruit even that much more. So the result is a rich, intense experience. Now, the folks at Donjon, they're in their 2nd generation of family winemakers. It's Claire Fabre is the name of the winemaker. And I think she does a beautiful job of a very traditional style of winemaking. She ferments in traditional cement and ages the wine in neutral casks, which helps focus on the fruit characteristics of the wine. So you get that really bright ruby color that's typical of Chateauneuf. And on the nose, you get the ripe wild raspberry, strawberry, cherry fruit characteristic. And this underlying spice that they call garrigue has this sagebrush spiciness to it. And on the palate, it has a plushness of tannin from the Syrah and the Mourvedre. And this particular wine has a slight peppery note as well. It comes from the 5% Cinsault that's blended in. Anyway, fantastic example of a classic Chateauneuf-du-Pape.
The 2015 Grattamacco Bolgheri Rosso represents to me one of the finest values within all Super Tuscan wines. This particular estate here is established back in 1977 as one of the first people kind of creating this new designation of what ended up being called Super Tuscan, which essentially means that you're taking international Bordeaux varietals like Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, so on and so forth, and you are making them in the area of Bolgheri or Tuscany or anywhere within the Tuscan area. Now, so this particular producer kind of being one of the first, along with Sassicaia, really predated other names like Ornellaia and Guadalatasso and several others. And so really kind of blazing the path for this wine category, which really has had a lot of, success within the last few decades. Now, when I go ahead and pour the wine and taste the wine, it absolutely begins to show its value. Now let me go and give it a little taste. Well, just off the nose, I get really kind of dark black, warm, kind of savory fruits. It definitely doesn't smell like Bordeaux. It definitely doesn't smell like Napa. It has this kind of warm, kind of Tuscan soul to it. There's a savory, sweet kind of tomato vine with like this kind of almost kind of green, herbaceous kind of tobacco component to it. It's really full in the mouth. It's really big. It's really rich. It's expansive, but it's not heavy. You know, don't usually taste too many Italian wines and feel this kind of weight or density or kind of heaviness. It still has this kind of really great line of acid. Red fruits, black fruits here, this dusty kind of red earth, I think is really, really nice in this wine. This tobacco note, this old worn leather, all of these kind of savory, kind of developed vinous characteristics are beginning to show through, while you still have this really great concentrated core of dark, ripe fruit that comes from the Cabernet family. Grattamacco hits this wine out of the park year in, year out. 2015 was one of the great vintages where everything kind of came together. It was a long growing season, very, very mild kind of conditions to pick. It's just a beautiful wine, really, really great price point to value ratio. Grattamacco is one of those classic producers, really kind of blazed kind of the way for that kind of category of super Tuscan wines. And so knowing this wine kind of gives you kind of a glimpse of what the origins of this category was. Beautiful wine. I think you're gonna love it as much as I do.
So this wine is the 2012 vintage of the Leeuwin Estate Margaret River Art Series Cabernet Sauvignon. So Margaret River is located in the far southwest corner of Australia. It's one of the most geographically isolated growing regions in the world, and it's surrounded on three sides by the ocean. So it's a very maritime influenced climate, and what this allows is for an evenness of temperature during the growing season. So rather than having big day to night shifts, it has this very long, slow growing process, which really aids the ripening of fantastic Cabernet Sauvignon. Leeuwin Estate is one of the most iconic producers in Margaret River. They were founded in the 1970s, and there's a sort of legendary story that Robert Mondavi was traveling there looking to possibly purchase some vineyards. He saw this site and recognized its potential and actually tried to buy this, but the Leeuwin family decided to maintain ownership of it and somehow convinced Robert Mondavi to become their advisor. This is still a family-owned winery, and the Art Series label is their most rich and what they consider the more age-worthy wines that they make from the estate. So aromatically, there's a lot of red and black fruit, this sort of blackberry, a little bit of black pepper, and some anise, some sort of black licorice notes to it, and this very slight mintiness. And on the palate, it's got a richness to it, but also a really refreshing acidity. Has this sort of cooling acid that comes out on the finish. Again, full of really beautiful red and black fruits, a little bit of mocha and cedar as well. It's really delicious.
The wine right here in the bottle is the Brut Premier from Louis Roderer, and this is about as classic as champagne gets. This particular producer, established back in 1776, which that might sound familiar as the year we declared our independence here in the United States, has been around for quite a while, right? They're located in an area of Champagne called the Marne Valley. And the Marne Valley is really known for me, in my opinion, is known for kind of making wines a little bit riper, a little bit fuller in style. Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier are the main grape varietals here within this area. And for me, those wines, those grape varietals give the wines a little bit more structure in Champagne, a little bit more of this ripe kind of full fruit characteristic. Now, they tend all of their vines organically, and the wines here generally tend to have this beautiful, round, rich creaminess to them. There's lots of development on the Louis Roderer wines. There's also usually a little bit more body and a little bit riper, kind of powerful profile to them. So I'm going to go ahead and taste the Louis Roderer Brut Premier right now. I'll give you a quick little tasty note. Now on the nose, I have really beautiful aromatic profiles of like sliced pear, yellow apple. There's also a little bit of this kind of slightly kind of like sweet, kind of preserved lemon zest, if you will. There is some white flower, there's a tiny bit of honeysuckle, and there's this creaminess. There's this almost kind of creme fraiche, kind of, not quite yogurt, but this really kind of creamy, round kind of profile to it, almost like fresh baked brioche or baked bread of some sorts. So let me put it right onto the palate. And this is classic Louis Roderer for me. Really creamy, very full, great power, good body to it, and it's rich. It's not this clean, lean, focused style of champagne. There's some body to this wine. There's some depth to it as well. Louis Roderer is one of those classic producers within the Marne Valley, making wines from, I think this is about 40% Pinot Noir, 40% Chardonnay, and they use about 20% Pinot Meunier. So a little bit more heavily tilted towards the red grape varietals and making champagne. And I think that always kind of leans their wines towards that richer, kind of fuller style. And when I think about enjoying this wine with food, I always think about this wine can make it a little bit farther, a little bit deeper into the menu than those really lean, clean, classic styles of Blanc de Blanc champagne. But classic producer, established the same year that we'd established our independence, which I think is really cool, kind of a cool little talking note, but it's a really, really beautiful wine. I think you're gonna love it, maybe not quite as much as I do.